Think of Health.
You all on behalf of Association of Physiologists and Pharmacologists of India, local chapter Gwalior. A warm welcome to you all. COVID-19 pandemic has messed human life in past few months. We have been the witness of acute phase of second wave of COVID-19. At present, this phase is over. So at present, there are many patients who are in the recovery phase of COVID-19. Therefore, this symposium, post-COVID, returning to normal health, has been planned to help these group of patients and share the information across the country for early recovery from COVID ailments. For the same, it is our privilege to have three eminent speakers with us. We have Dr. Shweta Sai ma'am. She is Associate Professor in Medicine from GR Medical College, Gwalior. We have Dr. K.K. Deepak sir. He is Professor and Head in Physiology, AIIMS New Delhi. And we have Mr. Madan sir, Associate Professor, Cardiac Rehabilitation Consultant at Sangaram Hospital. First of all, I would invite Dr. Shweta Sai ma'am. She is a very intellectual and determined person. Shweta Sai ma'am. She is Associate Professor in Medicine at Gajraj Medical College and J Hospitals. She has a 15 years of teaching experience in GR Medical College. She has more than 20 publications, most of them in international journals. She is a member of the peer review committee of many journals. Ma'am has been working over COVID patients since the beginning of the pandemic. We thank you, ma'am, for being with us and sparing time from your busy schedule of COVID duties. I request you,
so much. Thank you
to share your expertise on COVID patient diseases, post-COVID diseases, their mechanisms and prevention. Please, ma'am.
Thank you very much, all the organizers, and a warm welcome to our eminent speakers and the guests who have joined in. I am privileged to be part of this symposium. I shall be today speaking on post-COVID diseases, mechanisms and prevention. And as very rightly pointed out by Dr. Gaurav Jain, we are having a lot of survivors at present. So we have to focus on the people who have survived this terrible pandemic and they have managed to live through it. The care of these people is very important. Next slide, please. Next slide, yes. Under the brown fog of a winter dawn, a crowd flowed over London Bridge, so many. I had not thought death had undone so many. These famous lines are from a very iconic poem by the poet T.S. Eliot, who wrote this about 100 years ago. These lines appear to be very, very relevant in today's times when we are going through a terrible pandemic and seeing a lot of deaths because of the COVID-19 infection. In this symposium, however, what we are going to focus on is not the deaths, but those people who have actually managed to survive this infection. So how do we take care of them? By understanding the pathophysiology, the mechanisms behind the post-COVID syndrome. And here the importance lies in the fact that how do we define these patients who are post-COVID patients. Usually the patients of COVID will recover within 4 weeks, but some may continue to suffer even after 4 weeks. They are dubbed as long haulers. And post-acute COVID-19 has been defined as a syndrome of persistent symptoms and or delayed long-term complications of COVID infection beyond 4 weeks from the onset of symptoms. Next slide. Now, what are the types of post-acute COVID syndromes? They are of two types. The first one is the subacute or ongoing symptomatic COVID, which includes those having symptoms from 4 to 12 weeks beyond the acute COVID. The second type is the chronic or post-COVID syndrome, which includes symptoms and abnormalities beyond 12 weeks. So basically, there are three periods we have to remember: 4 weeks, 12 weeks. So before 4 weeks, it is acute COVID. 4 to 12 is the subacute or ongoing symptomatic COVID, and beyond 12 weeks, it becomes chronic or post-COVID syndrome. Next slide, please. So who are the likely sufferers? Those having hypertension, diabetes, pre-existing lung diseases, hypothyroidism, kidney disease, obesity, or old age. However, there are certain groups like women and BAME, that is the Black Asian minority ethnics, which are more likely to suffer. And rarely, it may be seen in the young and otherwise healthy people, even those who have suffered very mild disease. Next slide, please. A recent study has shown that only 10.8% of the survivors had no symptoms or manifestations, which means a whopping 89.2% of survivors are having some persistent symptoms. About 72% have major complaints of fatigue similar to post-SARS fatigue, which was seen with the SARS epidemic. Others, like that is 17.2%, have critical manifestations like lung fibrosis, kidney failure, myocarditis, and stroke. So we are having a very, very large number of patients to take care of. Next slide, please. So this pie chart shows a distribution of symptoms where you can see what an overwhelming majority of patients are likely to be suffering from post-COVID illness. Next slide, please. Talking about the pathophysiology in short, well, there are these are all postulated mechanisms. Some have been proved and some are just conjectures. So direct viral toxicity, endothelial damage and microvascular injury, immune system dysregulation, stimulation of a hyperinflammatory state, hypercoagulability causing in situ thrombosis and macrothrombosis. And lastly, the maladaptation of the angiotensin converting enzyme, that is the ACE pathway. Next slide, please. So what are the common presentations in these patients? First and foremost, the majority of patients will be presenting with a chronic fatigue syndrome, in which the patient complains of severe joint pains, tiredness, body ache, headache, etc. Muscle pain and fatigue was the most common symptom reported in one study, that is 76%. The second most common presentation is disturbed sleep, forgetfulness, sense of anxiety, depression. Brain fog is the word given to the people who suffer from lack of power of concentration and they are unable to perform their cognitive functions properly as before. Some common symptoms may be related to the respiratory system like dyspnea, cough, tightness in chest, persistent hypoxia, etc. Palpitations may be present, which is also commonly found, mostly because of tachycardia. There may be persistent diarrhea, nausea, loss of smell and taste. There may be weight loss as well. Next slide, please. So, now we shall discuss the problems one by one according to the system involved in the body. So first and foremost, the pulmonary manifestations, which are the most common. We used to think that they are most common, but now that we have seen a lot of survivors, we see that they are not as common, but they are very significant from the point of view of mortality and morbidity. So this may range from dyspnea to fibrotic lung damage. The dyspnea may or may not be associated with hypoxia. So if you look at the oxygen saturation of the patient, it may come normal, but the patient will be complaining, I'm having dyspnea, I'm not able to walk. So we do what is known as a quick 6-minute walking test, in which we do the 6-minute walking test. Ask the patient to walk for 6 minutes, and all the parameters are studied and compared with the nomograms available for that ethnic group, age and gender. Sometimes there might be a need for supplemental oxygen or continuous PEEP or other respiratory support while sleeping, because it has been observed that while sleeping the oxygen saturation tends to fall. Then there might be a reduced diffusion capacity in the lungs. Sometimes there might be a restrictive pulmonary physiology. A high number of patients, almost 50%, will show abnormal CT scan of the chest even after 6 months. Mostly they will be ground glass opacities, and it has also been postulated that chronic pulmonary embolism and consequent pulmonary hypertension may occur at times. Next slide, please. So this is a CT scan of the chest in which typical ground glass opacities can be seen, especially in the peripheral areas. Next slide, please. So what is the pathophysiology behind the pulmonary disease? Mostly they are viral dependent mechanisms because there is a direct invasion of the alveolar epithelial and endothelial cells. Sometimes there might be viral independent mechanisms like immunological damage, perivascular inflammation, etc. There is a breakdown of the epithelial endothelial barrier, and therefore there is a leakage of protein-rich exudate into the alveolar space, and it creates a picture like ARDS. Sometimes in the long-standing cases, we also get the presence of fibrosis, which is because of cytokines like IL-6, and this fibrosis may predispose to bacterial colonization. So we have got a double whammy. We have got fibrosis as well as bacterial colonization, which may result in bacterial pneumonias. There might be pulmonary vascular microthrombosis and macrothrombosis, and endothelial injuries may be present. Next slide, please. So how do we manage the patients having pulmonary disease? It's very important to do the home pulse oximetry to see the oxygen levels, and anything below 94% is going to be dangerous and should consult a specialist immediately. There should be serial pulmonary function tests. High resolution CT scans of the chest should be done at 6 and 12 months. Frequent sputum sampling should be done, especially if the patient is complaining of cough and fever, and appropriate antibiotics should be instituted. Steroids can be used if there is a presence of inflammatory disease, and it also prevents fibrosis, but we have to be careful looking at the glycemic status of the patient. Some antifibrotic drugs have been tried, but they are not yet FDA approved. They are pirfenidone and nintedanib. Now, these drugs have been used for many years in cases of interstitial lung fibrosis, but how effective they are going to be for the COVID survivors is yet a question mark. The most important cornerstone of pulmonary disease management is lung rehabilitation exercises, and no drug can ever replace this. Next slide, please. Coming to the next system, that is the CNS, where we see a lot of neuropsychiatric sequelae. Patients often complain of headaches resembling migraine. There might be dysautonomia, which is rare, of course. Cognitive impairment, like I have already talked about, known as brain fog, which entails difficulty in concentration. There is memory loss, language function may be impaired. There might be anxiety, depression, insomnia, which is quite common in 30 to 40% of patients. There can be multiple neurological problems even in young people. Strokes, seizures, and Guillain-Barré syndrome may occur. Some studies have indicated that there is an increased risk of Parkinsonism and Alzheimer's disease. Next slide. What is the pathophysiology? Again, it is repetitive. Direct viral invasion may occur in the neurocells. There might be immune dysregulation. Inflammaging, which is a new term which has been applied to the chronic low-level brain inflammation which has been seen in COVID survivors. There might be microvascular thrombosis. Sometimes these patients may be actually suffering from the iatrogenic effects of medication. There might be psychological impact of infection, which may impact the quality of life. And of course, there is neurodegeneration. Next slide. Coming to the next system, that is cardiovascular system. Sometimes there might be persistent symptoms of palpitations, dyspnea, and chest pain. We have noted that there is new onset hypertension and often tachycardia may be present in these survivors. The drug of choice in these cases would be a beta blocker if in case there is tachycardia which is causing a lot of palpitations. Initially, there were some issues regarding the use of ACE inhibitors because COVID has a mechanism of acting through the ACE receptors. But these fears have been unfounded, and now scientists agree that ACE inhibitors can be safely used in those patients who really need it for their cardiological well-being. So long-term sequelae may be due to increased cardiometabolic demand, myocardial fibrosis and scarring, which may result in cardiomyopathy and very importantly atrial fibrillation. Atrial fibrillation may occur because of the fibrosis of the conduction pathways. So it is quite a common presentation. And very important to note, we may have to give long-term anticoagulation in these patients. Next slide, please. Talking about the GIT and the hepatobiliary system, it has now been proved that prolonged viral fecal shedding can occur even after a negative RT-PCR test. COVID-19 has been seen to alter the gut microbiome, including strengthening of the opportunistic organisms, and there is a reduction of the beneficial commensals. Gut microbiota are known to alter the course of respiratory infection, and this is known as the gut-lung axis. One of them is the very important Scalobacterium prosnitzi, which is a commensal, and it is very useful in protecting the patient against opportunistic infections. And it has been found to be of low quantity in patients of COVID survivor syndrome. Recently, in India, a number of cases of intestinal gangrene have been reported in places like Rajkot, where the intestinal gangrene has occurred and they have to be surgically, the gangrenous part of the intestine has to be removed as soon as possible, and if not, it has a mortality of close to 50%. So even the clotting mechanism is not sparing the GIT. Next slide, please. How does the post-COVID survivor have a renal dysfunction? Well, many patients who are in the acute phase of COVID infection suffer from AKI. Often they may require renal replacement therapy in the form of dialysis, but they also recover completely most of the time. However, when on follow-up their eGFR is seen, it has been reported to be reduced even 6 months after recovery. The term OVAN is used for COVID-associated nephropathy, in which the predominant pattern is of renal injury characterized by the collapsing variant of focal segmental glomerulosclerosis. Sometimes acute tubular necrosis may also occur in response to chemokine activation. So the recommendation is that there should be close follow-up and always avoid nephrotoxic drugs. Next slide, please. So now coming to the hematological sequelae, which I think is the cornerstone of the COVID-related illness. Venous thromboembolic events have been reported in less than 5% of survivors. 2.5% may suffer from segmental pulmonary embolism, intracardiac thrombus, or ischemic strokes. And the pathophysiology, again, it is the hyperinflammatory, hypercoagulable state, endothelial injury, and platelet activation. A similar condition is DIC, but in DIC we see more of bleeding. Here we see more of clotting. Next slide, please. So, how to manage these hematological sequelae? Because these problems may have profound effects on the health of the patient. So, DOAC, that is direct oral anticoagulants, and LMWH, that is low molecular weight heparin, should be considered for extended thromboprophylaxis in patients, especially those patients who have predisposing factors like immobility. They are bedridden for a long time, they are not able to walk around. Second, persistently elevated D-dimer levels. D-dimer levels should be periodically tested, and if it is found to be elevated, especially more than 2 times the upper limit, then these patients should be on long-term DOAC therapy. Some patients who have certain metabolic diseases which are already prothrombotic, like the hypercholesterolemia, etc. Some patients who may have cancer, they should be advised to take DOAC. Now, DOAC and LMWH would be preferred over vitamin K antagonists, as there is less need to monitor the therapeutic levels or side effects. We all know that they do not cause much derangement of the prothrombin time. So, some examples of DOAC which we are using now are dabigatran, rivaroxaban, and apixaban, which are quite available quite easily in the market nowadays. Next slide, please. Now, coming to the next system, very important, the endocrinal system. In COVID patients, we have seen that there is a very high incidence of new onset diabetes mellitus. So they should be thoroughly evaluated, and appropriate measures like tapering or stopping of steroids should be instituted as and when, as early as possible. Sometimes there is worsening control of the pre-existing diabetes. Interestingly, diabetic ketoacidosis has been observed in patients without known diabetes, even weeks after resolution of the COVID symptoms. So they have to be managed properly. Subacute thyroiditis is also seen with clinical thyrotoxicosis. There might be new onset Hashimoto's thyroiditis. Sometimes Graves' disease may also occur. Bone demineralization also occurs quite frequently. Next slide, please. So again, the pathophysiology remains similar. There might be direct viral injury, immunological, inflammatory damage. Of course, complication because we use a lot of steroids. Diabetes, when it occurs during COVID or after COVID, is caused maybe by a deficit in insulin production, the infection stress response, peripheral insulin resistance, and the use of steroids. Unfortunately, the diabetes is usually irreversible, even though there is no damage to the beta cells. This is an important point which I will highlight in the next slide. Now, we have already discussed that there is no damage to the pancreatic beta cells. Still, it is likely to be a permanent diabetes. But the good thing is that since the beta cells are still active, we can manage the patients with agents other than insulin. So insulin is not always indicated unless and until the control with oral agents is not achieved. So interestingly, even in those patients who presented in ketoacidosis may also be managed with oral hypoglycemic agents. And like I told you, this diabetes is not reversible, may require long-term management. And in patients who present for the first time, we should, especially the young patients, we should do the antibody tests to rule out type 1 diabetes. The thyrotoxicosis, which is due to destructive thyroiditis, can be treated with steroids, and anti-thyroid medication is not necessary. Next slide, please. Some skin problems are noted. Skin rashes may be, and the predominant one is hair loss. And this may be due to telogen effluvium resulting from either the viral infection itself or due to the stress response associated with the COVID. Next slide, please. This is a rare disorder, that is multi-system inflammatory syndrome, especially seen in children. The subjects are usually 7 years to 21 years of age, may present with fever, abdominal pain, vomiting, diarrhea, rashes, etc. And sometimes there might be complications like coronary artery aneurysm and headache, encephalopathy, stroke, seizures, etc. This syndrome has also been reported in adults, but it is extremely rare. Next slide, please. There are very overwhelmingly debilitating nutritional sequelae because there is a lot of catabolism going on, and there is muscle wasting, feeding difficulties, and frailty in these patients. Malnutrition has been noted in as high as 26 to 45% of the patients, and the rehabilitation units should assess the survivors for their swallowing function. Many COVID patients have complained of a difficulty in swallowing, and that might also affect their nutritional status very badly. So, next slide, please. I have inserted this slide of mucormycosis. Even though in the Western literature this has not been recognized as a post-COVID complication, but in India, as we all know, we are suffering almost a pandemic of mucormycosis. So, next slide, please. These mucormycosis, the predisposing factors may be uncontrolled diabetes, cancer patients, steroid therapy, and in India, the incidence is 70 times the global figures. I'm sorry, there is a misprint. It's not 7, it is 70 times the global figures, and the mortality is as high as 20%. So we are dealing with a very serious disorder. The clinical features may be bloody black discharge from the nose, pain, redness, nasal stuffiness, eyelid swelling, altered mental status if there is intracranial extension. The exact reason why we are having this pandemic in India is not known, may be linked to excessive zinc, steroids, industrial oxygen, and diabetes. And how do we manage them? By supportive management. We may give injections of amphotericin B and of posaconazole tablets may be given. Surgical debridement is often required. So we are having a lot of surgeries on these patients. Next slide, please. So coming to my concluding slide, what is the future direction? COVID is now clearly established as a multi-organ disease. It is no longer restricted to the lung. Care for COVID patients does not conclude at the time of discharge. Interdisciplinary cooperation is required for comprehensive care of COVID survivors, and there is an imperative need to establish dedicated COVID-19 clinics to cater to the survivors of this disease. Next slide. Thank you very much for your patient listening.
Thanks a lot, ma'am.